All right, it is time for part two, instructional choice. Now that we've set the goal, what instructional strategies will you choose as an educator to help students reach those goals? So let's dive in. First, the best practice is utilizing backwards design, right? If you know what the end result is and the mastery level you want students to achieve on that specific content area, your learning outcome or your learning goal. If I know what that is, why wouldn't I design my lessons and my activities to help students achieve those goals? That's what backwards design is. We talked about that with summative assessments, right? Because summative assessments really are establishing what I want students to get out of this course or out of this unit or out of this chapter and codifying it as an assessment. And you can utilize that end assessment to build up your instructional practices for that unit or for that chapter, right? So I know what my goal is, and then I build my students intentionally to that goal. Unfortunately, it's something that I found as an instructor I often miss. I focus on the wrong things. I focus on engagement or trying to design something fun or exciting or interesting. And even though it can have educational value, I might realize when I'm getting to the test that I haven't actually hit my goals and I haven't helped students achieve at the level I wanted them to achieve. And now I'm trying to use my review session to kind of get them there. And it's a really difficult thing to manage if you're doing it that way. So backwards design is key. Second, now that I know what my end goal is and I've started to design backwards, it's time to choose the best instructional strategies. So I want to find the activities in my class that are going to help students get the content and apply the content and wrestle with the content in a scaffolded way, right? So I'm going to start sort of at the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy and I'm going to move my way up until we achieve the mastery level that I think is important for that particular learning outcome or objective. What is scaffolding? Scaffolding is just building up that hierarchy, right? Whenever you have brand new content, you want to start at the knowledge base at the very, very bottom there. Really important not to miss those defining those terms or the memorization of certain facts. And then you want to start building up towards that higher order thinking as you go. The key is to make sure that you're consistent with that, right? Students need to know what the mastery level is expected. You can model that. You can even show them examples of what it means to be at that level. And then consistently identify how each of your steps and activities is going to get them there, right? That's key. So, as when students understand what is expected of them, then they are likely to actually take notes the way that you want them to take notes. So, they're going to have their headers being sort of your main important topics. And they're going to be able to actually achieve at the level you want them to achieve because they've seen what it looks like and they know that is the purpose of your instruction. So, being consistent in how you scaffold is going to be really, really helpful to your students because they're going to start to see your instructional strategy, they'll appreciate it, and they will step up and try to learn at the level you've expected of them. All right, here's just a pathway that you can utilize that is sort of codifies this best practice, right? First, determine what students already know. Remember when we talked about starting at the knowledge base for Bloom's taxonomy? You might not have to. Students might already have that knowledge base, especially if you're looking at a skill type of curriculum, like in a math or a science, for example. They might have a strong foundation of knowledge that you can build upon. So then I can move them towards a higher order thinking there. Then, based on their prior knowledge, that pre assessment, set a goal for learning, right? Identify what those learning activities or outcomes are. Then, plan your instructional supports. Where do I start? I know that I want them to get to evaluating, but they're not ready for that now. So, what are the training wheels and assistance that I can give those students as they try to apply and achieve these goals? Then you implement your lessons and monitor feedback. This is where it's really important to have consistent formative assessments that inform your instruction. Then, over time, as they're moving up Bloom's taxonomy and they're getting closer to achieving that goal, you start to remove some of that scaffolding so that students can then achieve independently. And this is something as a novice instructor I wasn't very good at. We collectively, as a class, were really successful, right? Because I was leading the way and I would ask my discussion questions and we're like, man, we're there. Look at the thinking that is happening. But what I wasn't doing was building activities that allow every single student to be successful on achieving that learning outcome. So differentiation becomes key in that, and then making sure that you have instructional supports for all students is key. Now, a classic way that you see this is you see, instruction, and then students take notes, and then there's review, so a little bit more scaffolding, and then they take a test without their notes and without their review, right? I think we can do something a little bit more robust, but on its basic nature, that is scaffolding. Best practices say, hey, let's have a few more steps along the way where we give them more supports and then are intentionally removing them to move them up towards Bloom's taxonomy. And then you continue to build on that feedback or on that content. You continue to monitor, you continue to provide feedback, and you repeat over and over again as you're trying to achieve your goals. Okay, I think this is a useful sort of take on Bloom's taxonomy. It looks at it a little bit different rather than a pyramid going all the way down. It says, hey, remembering is probably less important. It's probably not your main focus as an educator. None of us want students to just memorize a bunch of stuff, right? So listing, finding, naming, identifying, locating, memorizing, defining, all of those things end up being in that category. So let's make it a little less valuable, a smaller, what is that, an upside down trapezoid? Then understanding is that next level, like probably a little bit more important. Do they understand it? Are they making sense of the information? Do they understand what it means? Can they interpret? Can they summarize? Can they explain? Can they infer? Can they paraphrase? Can they discuss? Then that next level that we want to achieve is sort of that applying. Use information in new but similar situations. So I give them problems similar to the problems we did, but with different integers, for example, or I give them a challenge that's very similar to what we've done, but a little bit different, so that they have to apply and show that they can, connect their understanding and solve a problem, for example. And then you move up and put all three of these on sort of the same level rather than a hierarchy. Creating, evaluating, and analyzing all are higher order thinking. All are the things that we're really trying to achieve, but are all kind of very different. So depending on what you're trying to get students to do and what your goal is, maybe creating is the highest level that you want to achieve, or maybe evaluating is your highest level, or maybe analyzing is. And those all look a little bit different. So again, just another Bloom's taxonomy. If you're like me, you like to have this thing up on your screen or print it out beside you when you're building lessons, because it's really, really important. I find this diagram a little more useful than the other Bloom's taxonomy as I'm doing these things. Okay, so diving deeper into it, make sure when you're delivering information, you're trying to identify a variety of ways to do that, right? We know that information has to be delivered to students. Most of the time, that delivery method is a lecture, teacher driven. Now, some teachers are very gifted as lecturers and they tell stories and they're very engaging and students connect to it. Unfortunately, though, that is more an exception than it is a rule. It is difficult for all students to engage with a lecture. So, being teacher driven all of the time might not be the best approach for you if you're not a really strong lecturer, right? Other ways that you can do that, though, is you can have videos that augment sort of your lecturing. You can have other presentations bring outside sources into your classroom that sort of help students understand that content. Then you can jump to student driven. Student driven looks a little bit different, right? I have students discover content. I have them discuss main topics. I have them go through different stations and bring all this information together. I might jigsaw and have them discover some information in depth and then discuss that information on a surface level. And the student becomes the instructor of the content, right? So that's a sort of student driven approach. Again, that's challenging because you don't have as much control over the content there. So it's very important to build your activities so that they're emphasizing the right things. And then you have blended. Blended is really student centered. And it's kind of the sweet spot of instructional delivery, right? Where some student involvement is in that, but also teachers are guiding and sometimes giving specific instruction. So teachers are instructing on sort of the really dense things or the really important pieces. And then students are also discovering to sort of fill in the blanks in that. And they can do that online, or they can do that through discussions, or they can do that through reading a book. And so what you have is sort of this blended delivery of content where, yes, you make sure all of the students have the main points with sort of mini lectures, for example. And then students are filling in the blanks with things that are relevant to them. They're going to help them achieve their goals a little bit later on. So it's really a little bit more engaging than teacher driven. And then the students will demonstrate learning after you've determined that. How do students demonstrate their learning after you deliver that information? And this is where you have that assessment strategy in place, right? Make sure that students are actually achieving it when you deliver that information. Okay, that's part two. That's a lot. That's sort of a bird's eye view on what it means to choose instructional design or making instructional design choices. Next, we'll get into a class snapshot where we look at student-centered learning a little more specifically and what sort of the best practices are on a daily basis in your classroom.